This is, we were looking back there at Joël Egalgi, who is the Range Operations Manager. He calls out all the major events during the flight. Getting a really good image there of the launcher lit up. Bit cloudy there. A word about the final launch sequence. We're going to see, can you see those swing arms at the bottom? We've got 4 blue and yellow arms clamping onto the bottom of the launcher. And they have big weights, counterweights at the bottom of them, those yellow structures. We'll see those move away just before launch. Our satellites are inside there, waiting patiently for launch in first class. It's nice and cool in there. They've got air conditioning. And the mast on the right-hand side is...
Largages ombilicaux, ciao.
Well, he's just announced the mast is containing what we call the umbilical lines. Those are the feed lines going up from the top of the rocket to the ground, and those have just been detached and they fall into a basket which you can't see. You can't see them because they're inside the mast, but you'll see that mast and the one below it pull away just before the launch. Also, a quick word about the launch sequence. We switched the engines on 16 minutes before liftoff, at 16 seconds rather, and the reason for that is we need to check that they are working well. So we throttle them up slowly, and we increase the thrust slowly, and when they reach full thrust, the rocket lifts off. Nothing can hold it back, and those swing arms pivot away. Looking very relaxed in there. Everybody's done this many, many times before. Getting closer now to the 1 minute mark.
À tous de DDO, attention pour moins 1 minute. Top, H0 moins 1 minute.
And we are 1 minute to launch. We're orbiting the first 6 satellites in the brand new OneWeb constellation built by the Airbus OneWeb Satellites joint venture, and we're flying on board the 21st Soyuz to launch from the Guiana Space Center. Our very best wishes now to all the teams.
Largage du Macazedem. À tous de DDO, attention pour le début de la séquence d'allumage lanceur. H0 moins 20 secondes. Largage du VKM. Allumage triétage. À tous de DDO. Attention pour le décompte final. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Top. Et décollage VS21, OneWeb F6. Normaux. La propulsion est conforme à l'attendu.
And they are off. The first 6 OneWeb satellites have begun their journey, heading out north over the Atlantic towards the Caribbean. Look at that. Those engines on board Soyuz are pushing hard against Earth's gravity. We're burning 5 engines at the moment.
Tous les paramètres à bord sont normaux.
He's telling us that everything on board is going according to plan. And we've got 5 engines. We've got 1 on the main stage. We've got 4 on each one of those boosters. But it's the boosters that are doing all the work right now. Ah, look at that streak of light heading out across the skies here at the Guiana Space Center, out over the Atlantic Ocean. The boosters only burn for 2 minutes, but that's long enough for Soyuz to escape the pull of our planet. They're delivering 80% of our thrust right now.
Les paramètres propulsifs sont conformes.
And if we're lucky, we might see them falling away. I think we're going to see them being jettisoned. Look out for 4 dots. There we go. There they go. Look how they twist and turn. That's all part of the plan. Very beautiful sight, actually, to see that with the cameras. And now what we're left with... He's told us that that's been confirmed. You can see that's what it looks like from in space. So they've burnt all their fuel. We don't need them anymore. And we are burning the main core stage, the Block A. And if you take a look...
Bonne stabilisation du lanceur suite à la séparation.
He's telling us that there's good stabilization after the separation there of those boosters. And you take a look at the front of the launcher, that's actually called the fairing, as I mentioned earlier. And he's saying everything's going well. And the satellites are in there, and indeed that fairing has been protecting our satellites. It protects us from the rigors of the launch. A number of things it needs to protect us from, notably the acoustic vibrations at liftoff. It's very loud, I'm sure you can imagine. It's also protecting us from friction, because as we fly through the dense part of the atmosphere, that creates a lot of friction on the outside, and that creates heat, of course. As we get higher up, the air gets thinner, and we have less and less friction. And if you look at the bottom left-hand side of your screen, you can see we are 116 kilometers above Earth. So we've gone above what we call the Kármán line. That's the border with space. So effectively we don't really need our fairing anymore, because we hardly have any friction, certainly not enough for it to be a problem, and so we can jettison it. This is the scheduled moment for jettisoning the fairing, and that's what it looks like from cameras on board a previous launcher. And he's confirmed that we have that separation. Now, if you have ever wondered how satellites work, how they get the internet to you, and how we all get connected, then you're in luck, because a man who knows is David Nemeth from OneWeb, and David is with me now. David, thank you very much for joining us.
Hi, Katie. I'm so happy to be here.
David, you're the Director of Systems Modelling at OneWeb. In a nutshell, what does that mean?
So my team is responsible for doing really detailed models of the satellites flying and connecting to ground stations and connecting the users, and really making sure that we've got the capacity that we want and that we know how to run the system properly.
Very important work. And we're coming up now on the scheduled separation of the next stage. We use a hot stage technique on Soyuz, which means we switch on the engine of the third stage before we separate the second stage. And more cameras there on a previous launch showing us.
Allumage bloc I, extinction bloc A et séparation.
And we have the confirmation there from the range operations manager. So we are now burning the third stage, and that's what it looks like. David, you can see your satellites for the first time. Can you talk through for us what we're looking at?
So what we're seeing here is the dispenser, which has 4 rings, which would, in this design, mount 32 satellites. We're launching 6 today, plus 6 mass frequency simulators. And the first 2 satellites you saw were at the top there. Those are going to be the first 2 to be ejected. The dispenser, the shape of the satellites are sort of a trapezoid, and they fit around.
I'm just going to stop you for a second with trapezoid. Now, can we imagine a triangle and cut the top off?
Very much like it. One way to think of it is like corn on the cob, and that's like the kernel. And it's narrow at the bottom, and it's wider at the top. And the satellites were actually designed that way so that we could efficiently put them in the dispenser and still use the most volume possible for our design.
So with your corn on the cob analogy, then, the tube that we were looking at back there in the middle is the dispenser. So the tube is the corn.
The tube
is the cob.
The tube is the cob, which we will throw away when we're done. And the kernels are the satellites, which are we launching off now into space, and which will start providing service for us.
Nominal du bloc I.
Our team's looking very relaxed in there. The OneWeb teams, we're looking inside here, the Mission Control Center inside the fishbowl, given that it's got glass all the way around it. Just a reminder that we have
Stabilisation du lanceur.
the information on the screen there.